B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Friday, May 15th, 2020. I mean, if you're going to try to pass a messaging bill that is dead on arrival in the Senate, wouldn't you throw everything in the hopper? I mean, it's already $3 trillion, right? As I record this podcast, Friday, 3 p.m. Pacific time, the House, to my knowledge, has not voted on the $3 trillion relief package that has plenty of good stuff in it. Bailouts for state and local governments, more money for hospitals who've been devilishly hammered financially because they made room for coronavirus cases that didn't all materialize. And they've suffered hugely. And a lot of people say, see, there never was a problem. And my response is compare New York to Los Angeles. And the delay of roughly 2 weeks in New York's lockdown measures left it with thousands of fatalities, tens of thousands of people hospitalized. And while L.A. is not in the clear, its curve has not come down. It has had about 10% of the death numbers as New York has. And, of course, the economy's been hammered. The people at the bottom get hurt the most. And so, as I point out, this so-called HEROES Act, like any one of these massive must-pass bills, has good components that are well-intentioned and some pretty bad shit. And as of this moment, I don't have an indication that it has passed. I don't know if they're stuck in lengthy debate or if Pelosi misjudged and doesn't actually have the votes for it. But she freely acknowledges that this is a starting point for negotiation. And I would add that Mitch McConnell, so far, is being deceptive. Because when the last bailout package eked through on a voice vote in the House and a real vote in the Senate, he said, oh, don't worry, there are going to be other opportunities here to help out some of the people who've been really hurt by this. Well, Mitch speaketh with forked tongue. Because now all of a sudden he's concerned about the deficit. He and his allies are saying, you can't spend your way to prosperity except when you shovel money at corporate interests and allow rich cronies to tap the money that was set aside for small businesses, most of whom can't actually use the loans even if they've been approved for them. We're told that the White House is threatening a veto if the Senate passes this package, and Mitch McConnell says he's not even going to take it up, if at all, until after Memorial Day. So they don't feel any urgency. And that's one of the reasons why I feel that Pelosi has misjudged the progressive side of her party. Now, I know she's laser-focused on those people in the purple districts, the candidates who flipped a Republican to Democrat in 2018. People like Abigail Spanberger, the former CIA agent who represents a district in Virginia. She has announced she'd vote against this package because it might threaten her reelection. And some of that may be true. I don't know the calculus in each district. I don't know the dynamics of who's drawn a significant opponent and who hasn't. But in the big picture, I argue at a time like this, people respond to bold leadership. And when you're counting votes and trying to, straddle, I think people smell that. And because the Republicans are so extreme in their projected strength, in the eyes of their own voters, I believe that waffling only hurts these moderate or conservative Democrats. So it's 1,800 pages, $1 trillion for state, local, and tribal governments. Another round of direct payments to individuals up to $6,000 per family, including to unauthorized immigrants. I welcome that, but I believe it would be sliced and diced out of the package in the Senate. $200 billion for hazard pay for essential workers. And I'll note in an aside here that this is about the time where most of the people who've been on the front lines at your grocery store, some delivery workers, and others who got a $2 hour bump, they called it hero pay, right, for keeping a Starbucks open. Well, Target, Walmart, Amazon, the grocery chains, they've all announced that that's over. No, you're not heroes anymore. You're just at risk for unruly patrons who don't want to wear a face mask. And the Russian roulette of picking up the virus as you work for less pay than you did a week ago. $75 billion for coronavirus testing and tracing. That seems low to me. Increased spending on food stamps. I applaud that. $175 billion in housing support. But they rolled back or eliminated the student loan forgiveness. And there are many other onerous elements in the package. And I want to thank our dynamic and reliable contributor, Linda Lewis, who found a list of some of the dirt, the crappy stuff in the HEROES Act. And one of the things they did that was oh so clever is they eliminated one lowercase c from a certain clause of this legislation. And as you may know, nonprofit groups are generally registered under the Internal Revenue Code, Section 501c3. But 501c is a big section. It includes trade associations. You can call them lobbyists. It includes dark money political groups. Yes, the bill extends Paycheck Protection Program funds to trade associations, C4s. Those are also used for dark money groups that don't have to name their donors and can operate in political advocacy. And somebody, I can't remember, somebody on Twitter pointed out the difference where the original legislation was limited to Section C, subsection C. And by just removing that and making it apply to the entire Section 501, these other groups get to lap at the trough too. And according to the American Economic Liberties Project, there's no prohibition on mergers. There's a tax cut for the wealthy. Now, this one's controversial, and it's one that I look at and I say, well, they should be talking about repealing the entire package of Trump Republican tax cuts that were rammed through at the end of 2017. But instead, they're talking about a temporary rollback in the cap on what are called SALT, state and local taxes. And this was a pernicious element of the Trump tax cuts, because as they gave away money and showered tax cuts on people who don't need it, the 1%, and corporations, they actually raised taxes in a targeted way that hammered a certain subset of people who make between about $100,000 and $200,000 household income. And it is targeted to blue states because we, California was one of the main targets, have a high state income tax rate. We have high housing and mortgage costs, and so the write-off for mortgage interest is significant to many families who've bought their first home in a very expensive market without the benefit of Proposition 13 for People like me and Kathy, who've been in the same house for many years, and we enjoy a lower net property tax cost because we've been there for a long time. It's complicated, but that's the simplest way to explain it. And so by capping the mortgage deduction and the deduction for state and local taxes, it squeezed people in New York, New Jersey, Illinois, California, and maybe one or two other states. At least it squeezed them the most. And I got into a little dust-up with my pal Ian Berman on Facebook because he looks at this and he thinks that it's a sop to the super wealthy. But my example to him is that a firefighter and a nurse with a household income of $130,000, $150,000 struggling to meet a mortgage of $5,000 or $6,000 a month, losing that write-off costs them $20,000 or $30,000 a year in actual taxes, not just deductions. So that's my soapbox there. The package also includes a bailout for mortgage servicers, subsidies for health insurance monopolies, and the American Prospect notes that in addition, the act mandates Federal Reserve loans to large owners of rental apartments, you know, the Kushners, or your favorite slumlord in your community. And the Democratic Policy Center also criticized the bill for what it doesn't include: recurring direct cash payments, a paycheck guarantee, cancellation of rent and mortgage payments, expansion of Medicare to cover the rapidly growing number of unemployed and uninsured Americans, and don't forget Medicare for all. Now, this week, while The Intercept is not a perfect media outlet, and only Glenn Greenwald takes up the case against Russiagate, Aida Chavez is the latest to drill in to the failed efforts of progressives to, in particular, get this paycheck protection, which is different from the payroll protection. They should use different terminology, but they didn't. Anyway, she gives a good recap of the efforts since early April by progressive groups to coalesce around the Congressional Progressive Caucus to advance bold legislative priorities for working people. And as we have said, Pramila Jayapal, the congresswoman from, I believe it's Seattle, but it's Washington State, she tried to work with the Working Families Party, Justice Democrats, who are a little further to the left. And as the article explains, they had moments of agreement, but in the end, they kind of went their own ways. And there's still a minority in the Democratic caucus in the House. And as I mentioned earlier, Pelosi is laser-focused. She would use the term reptilian. I heard her say it many times when I worked as a campaign advisor to her 25 years ago. Almost 25 now. And so she's trying to hold on to her job. She's only speaker if she has a Democratic majority. The apparent loss of Christy Smith to Mike Garcia in the special election north of Los Angeles this week, I think, signals to her that she cannot move too far left and hold her caucus. Yesterday, I opened with the double dose of irony, your daily adult requirement, noticing that Senator Richard Burr, who's embroiled in this investigation into what we would call insider trading, he used confidential briefing information about the impending pandemic, sold a shipload, I just didn't use the T this time, of his stock, and he had to cough up his phone. And this is a direct result of the domestic surveillance rules, the aggressive law enforcement tactics that were enabled by the Patriot Act, expanded by the domestic wiretapping and surveillance programs, hammered away, chipped away by James Comey, and tolerated by Obama. And Obama made permanent the temporary surveillance incursions that were launched under the Bush administration. And so Richard Burr was a victim of some of his own policies. And in the last 2 days, there was what's called a cloture vote in the Senate, and then the full vote on the extension of the Orwellian named and cynically named USA Freedom Act. Yes, it's the freedom of your government to violate your Fourth Amendment rights. That's what it's really about. And it's just the code for doing that. Yeah, they got rules, and, the bill was written by that great libertarian, not capital L, Gerald Nadler, the New York congressman who chairs the House Judiciary Committee. And I've had some interviews with Mr. Nadler. He's a smart guy. He's entirely humorless. And he is an enabler of the extension of the government's right to violate your rights. So, on Thursday was the cloture vote. That's the Senate rule that takes 60 votes to advance a bill to a floor vote. And the floor vote was kind of a no-brainer, 80-16. But St. Bernard Sanders was absent for both of those votes. Now, I don't know if Bernie was getting his hair done or, he was back in Vermont. I really don't know why he was missing in action. But he could have cast the crucial vote against the legislation to prevent it from going to the floor in the cloture vote on Thursday. But he wasn't there. He shows up in the tally as not present, not voting. So let's list the heroes here, because the people who sold us out, well, that list is too long. You don't want to hear 80 names. But here are the 16 members of the Senate, including 2 Republicans, notably Senator Richard Burr of North Carolina. He decided he's had enough of this surveillance shit. And he and Rand Paul of Kentucky were the only 2 Republicans who voted against extending the government's right to violate yours. Democrats include Baldwin of Wisconsin, Brown of Ohio, Cantwell of Washington, Durbin of Illinois, good for you, Dick, Heinrich of New Mexico, Hirono of Hawaii, Markey of Massachusetts, Merkley of Oregon, Murray of Washington, Schatz of Hawaii, Tester of Montana. Now, that's a surprise to me. Udall of New Mexico, Warren of Massachusetts, nice going Liz, and Ron Wyden of Oregon. And it's interesting because Pat Leahy of Vermont should be on this list. But I guess he was satisfied that he made a few minor changes to the rules in the FISA court, which is a corrupt enterprise that has been misled by the FBI and our spies for years. Come on, Pat. You're in your final legs. Why can't you suck one up for us on the Fourth Amendment? And, of course, Dianne Feinstein, she voted for it. And the ever-enabling San Francisco Chronicle, they've been in the tank for Di-Fi since she was the mayor of San Francisco back in the 1980s when I first encountered her. And she did submit, she said she was happy to voluntarily answer questions about her own family stock trade. She said, well, my husband, Dick Blum, he's the money guy here. And yeah, he sold between $1.5 million and $6 million at the end of January and the middle of February, right before the market tanked. But I didn't whisper anything to him about it. And by the way, I missed one of those key meetings where they told Senator Burr what was coming and led him and his brother to sell massive amounts of their stock holdings. Also in the Senate, Lindsey Graham. I last reported on him yesterday declining to respond to the president's order to summon Barack Obama to the investigation of Russiagate. And I don't trust Graham. He is a partisan hack. You remember in 2016, he was actually a candidate for president. And he was calling out Trump for the liar and con man that he is. But he sure got over that. And yes, I believe we have a tainted process that led us to the phony Russiagate narrative. But I don't have any trust in Lindsey Graham to get to the bottom of it. And so, once again, we see a lot of bloviating from the corporate media, denouncing Trump for calling it Obamagate. And I just need to once again reiterate that I have no respect for Donald Trump. And he acts in an idiot way most of the time. His tweeting, his compulsive commentary, his blame shifting are all things that I deplore. But he's onto something here with Russiagate and the corporate media, the so-called liberal media. They're very busy using every available tactic to divert, distract. They use straw men. They use indignant arguments with elements of truthiness to try to maintain the fiction that Russiagate was real, that Mueller did an honest investigation, that there was evidence to support the claims that Russia hacked the DNC and gave that to WikiLeaks. So my Chronicle, here in San Francisco, ran almost the same headline today over a different, updated Associated Press story. Trump, allies try to reframe probe before election. And the lower, lower font, smaller font lead just above it says Russia investigation. Well, what's actually in play here in this article is not about the Russia investigation. It's about the Flynn investigation. And his being accused of lying, and Trump said he lied, and Mike Pence said he lied, and then he told the judge he lied, and now he wants to withdraw that. And I don't for a moment defend Mike Flynn. We'll get to some of the attacks on him in a moment. But as Scott Ritter persuaded me in our in-depth interview earlier this week, I hope you will listen to it if you haven't so far. There is a technical legal issue that does support Bill Barr's move to withdraw the charges against Mike Flynn. It's messy because he's in pretty deep, and he has lied to the court, either in falling on his sword or now trying to somehow pull that sword out of his gut. And I think he's liable to perjury charges, even if the judge allows the original charges to be vacated. We'll have to watch that worm crawl out. At any rate, Peter Baker, the think writer at the New York Times, he says that Trump is resorting to his old ploy of blaming Obama. And there are elements of truth here. Going back years, Trump attacked Obama for being from Kenya, the birther issue. He has attacked Obama for leaving the cabinet bare for supplies, claiming there was no plan to deal with the pandemic. And Mitch McConnell rarely admits error. But he told his friends at Foxy Friends, oh gosh, I guess I did make a mistake. There actually was an Obama administration plan for a pandemic. And when I said that the other day, I misspoke. But anyway, Baker just goes on to list many of the atrocious claims that Trump has made about Obama. But it is designed to spin you away from examining the central issue here. It recites some of the history. The FBI opened its investigation into ties between Russia and the Trump campaign in July 2016. Not long after, WikiLeaks released thousands of internal Democratic Party emails that intelligence officials believed had been hacked by Russian operatives. Well, it's still a matter of just intelligence belief and assessment, because we know from the recently released testimony of Sean Henry, the CrowdStrike cyber genius, former FBI employee, a guy who had been mentored by Bob Mueller when he ran the FBI. They don't have any evidence of that. They never did. But that's what most people who believe the Russiagate narrative believe firmly. Oh, yeah. Yeah, Mueller got the proof. I didn't read his report because, you know, the New York Times summarized it for me. So they maintain a very defensive posture, not reviewing any of the Sean Henry testimony, just blaming Trump for having it released. And as I have widely obviously acknowledged, Trump is doing this to resuscitate his political fortunes and to distract from his bungling of the coronavirus response. There is no doubt about that. But that doesn't make his position empty. And that's what the media would have you believe. The other front page story in Friday's New York Times, written by Adam Goldman and Mark Mazzetti, two key promoters of the Russiagate narrative, Trump rewrites the Flynn case to settle scores. And once again, it's fair to say, it's a dramatic rewrite, saying he, was framed and trapped and he lied about lying and that wasn't true, but it's not a lie. So, Trump is no hero. Neither is Bill Barr, and Mike Flynn is a schlub. But they have the upper hand here, and the corporate media refuses to acknowledge that. Michelle Goldberg, opinionating in the Times today, Obamagate is a fake scandal. And then she contrasts that with Rick Bright's whistleblower testimony before the House subcommittee yesterday. And that's unfair to Rick Bright to be lumped together with this stuff. Goldberg, recently people on the right have started pushing a ludicrous pseudo-scandal they're calling Obamagate. It holds that investigations by Obama's administration into Russia's attacks on the 2016 presidential election were a form of illicit sabotage of Donald Trump and his team. So she actually states the central thesis here by denying it. Her next breath, the story doesn't really make sense. Well, if you are thoroughly committed to the Russiagate narrative, to the Mueller limited hangout investigation, to the false explanation for why Hillary Clinton lost, you would believe that it doesn't make sense. But that doesn't mean you're practicing journalism. That doesn't mean that you are applying any objective standards. That doesn't mean that you're considering the new evidence that has recently been released. Then we go to my old buddy Paul Waldman. He writes op-eds at the Washington Post now, but when was it? Back in 2006, 2007? He was a weekly contributor to my syndicated radio show when he worked over at Media Matters for David Brock. And their job was to explain the lies of Fox News. It was a useful enterprise. But it was anti-propaganda, and that's what he's doing here today. So his headline, Mike Flynn isn't a martyr, he's a crook and a crackpot. I fully agree. And he says, Michael Flynn, a martyr? He said he's the one they want to portray as a victim. What's next? Jeffrey Epstein was framed. Bernie Madoff was a humanitarian. Al Capone was misunderstood. I mean, he only left out Darth Vader and Adolf Hitler to his straw man list. Then he lowers the boom. Here's the truth. Flynn should never have been allowed within 10 miles of the White House. He was a dangerous, dishonest, shady operator who was also kind of a loon. Absolutely, Paul, that's right. But this is a straw man argument. He then lists 10 bullet points, and I agree with 9 of the 10. I've linked to the article, and you can go through it yourselves. The only one I don't agree with is that Flynn's appearance, he got $45,000 to go to Moscow to sit at a table with Jill Stein, and Putin stopped by for a few minutes. It was a bad optic photo op. And he probably shouldn't have taken the money. but it doesn't support his linkage to the Russiagate narrative. And that's what they try to twist it into. Next, Susan B. Glasser, in a Washington letter from Trump's Washington in the New Yorker. She shifts to Trump's personal lunacy. Again, loads of truthiness here. That he's got an alternate reality, that he is a very paranoid individual who always reflexively shifts the blame to other people. She exonerates any ill intention behind the Obama officials who unmasked the Mike Flynn phone call. She talks about, again, Trump's lunacy, hating on Obama, lying about him, blaming him. These long ago became the default settings of Trump's presidency. Now, this is all true stuff. But it is used to deflect your attention from the mess that is before you. And last night, as usual, I watched Rachel Maddow on MSDNC, and she took a break from her coronavirus coverage, which is mainly intended to embarrass Trump. She covers almost nothing else now. She spent 2 segments in a fawning interview of Governor Andrew Cuomo, where they kind of giggled about how big of fans they are of each other, even though Rachel is the, I think, direct competitor of, don't call him Fredo, Chris Cuomo, the governor's little brother. And so to put all this in some sort of a Jell-O dish and firm it up, we have to turn to the sassy Aussie, Caitlin Johnstone, in a column published at Consortium News today. I highly recommend it. And she says, yeah, we have new details that include Obama officials, including Joe Biden, requesting the unmasking of a conversation between Flynn and the Russian ambassador, the FBI's then counterintelligence director discussing trying to get Flynn to lie during his interrogation about the Kislyak call, and the revelation that there was never any concrete evidence that Russia hacked the DNC. And then she sadly concludes, like basically everything else in this stupid timeline, this issue has instead been reduced to the stagnation of vapid partisan squabbling. Democrats and their allied media are finger-wagging at Trump for his using conspiracy theories to distract from his coronavirus failures, and MAGA pundits are once again beating the tired old drum that this scandal is going to bring down major deep state players and drain the swamp once and for all. She said ever since 2016, both parties have been taking turns screaming at the top of their lungs that earth-shattering revelations are right around the corner, about to obliterate the other party any minute now. And she writes, quoting Ray McGovern at Consortium News this week, by any normal standard, former FBI Director Comey would now be in serious legal trouble, as should former DNI James Clapper, former CIA Director John Brennan, et al. And then Johnstone goes on, neither Comey nor Clapper nor Brennan are in any legal trouble at all, nor will they be, nor will any other major player responsible for leading America on a crazy collusion wild goose chase which accomplished nothing but distracting from real issues and manufacturing consent for mountains of Cold War escalations against Russia. More from Katie. You will never see Obama or his administration officials brought down by Obamagate for the same reason Trump wasn't brought down by the Mueller investigation. The swamp protects its own. Both Obama and Trump administrations are packed full of crooks and mass murderers who could and should be imprisoned for any number of offenses, but they won't be, because that would require a prosecutorial body, that is separate from the swamp of corruption with which both of America's mainstream parties are inexorably interwoven. You cannot use the swamp to drain the swamp. So it is, I think, a brilliant piece. Analysis that cuts through all of the bullshit. And she's probably right. Now, whether people get brought into court or brought down, I think the truth is that Donald Trump will use this to his political advantage. It'll be used to slime Joe Biden, who can barely get up for all of the slime that he carries with him on a daily basis. And that is the sad conclusion that I leave you with on that topic today. I want to recommend an in-depth and well-researched investigative piece by Max Blumenthal, published today at the Gray Zone Project. He delves into a spy-for-hire company called UC Global, based in Spain, and run by a guy named David Morales, who had dreams of becoming the next Blackwater chief, Eric Prince. So he finally made it into the bigs in 2016. He traveled to Las Vegas to some spook conference, and he came back with a contract that nominally was to provide security for the $70 million mega yacht of one Sheldon Adelson. Adelson was Trump's biggest financial supporter in 2016, with strong ties to the Zionist government of Israel. He runs a free newspaper over there that showers Netanyahu with favorable coverage. And in the piece, which runs 25 pages, and I've just read the first few, I'm going to enjoy finishing it over the weekend, he discloses that in the contract to provide security for the yacht, Morales was really running an operation to conduct surveillance at the Embassy of Ecuador in London, where Julian Assange had been given asylum. And they had cameras in the bathroom. Blumenthal reports that at one point they took out the trash that included a diaper to confirm the DNA in the poop and make sure it was Assange's child. And that only surfaced in recent arguments before the extradition court in London, that Assange has a couple of kids. So it's a very interesting piece, and it shows that this nominally Spanish firm was providing the fruits of its surveillance to the CIA. As you may know, we're running the Peter B. Collins Podcast Community Fund, and I want to thank a couple of donors who just sent in checks. Del Leonard, he is one of my longest boosters. He's based in Maine. I had a chance to have a seafood lunch with him on the waterfront right there at the Maine-New Hampshire border a couple of years ago. He continues to be my vice president for marketing in New England, and he made a very generous $200 contribution to our community fund. Also, I had a pleasant surprise when I went to the P.O. Box yesterday, a $100 check from our friend Russell Tice. And Russ Tice was, for me, the original NSA whistleblower. He's the one who revealed to me that he saw the papers to wiretap Senator Dianne Feinstein and many other top leaders during the Bush administration before he left the NSA and became a whistleblower. And I don't think Russ ever gets the credit he deserves for the risks that he took to share what he could about the gross invasion of our constitutional rights. And he sent me a lovely note, greetings back to my birthday in April, and a check for our community fund. And once again today, I am looking for applications for a $100 grant. If you could use $100 to help cover the gaps in your declining income these days, maybe it's been interrupted by a job loss that could turn out to be long-term, please don't be shy. Drop an email to peter@peterbcollins.com. Tell me your situation and what $100 could do for you, and I would be happy to draw on the funds that listeners like Russ and Dell have contributed and pass it along to you, paying it forward at a difficult time. And I'm going to personally nominate a woman I know could use $100. She is 86-year-old Libby Sherwood. And before we had to take the break because of the shutdowns and the lockdowns, I have been watching Libby's dog Bodie here at the Secret Studio a couple of days a week because Libby has trouble making ends meet. Her Social Security and other Pension-style benefits don't quite cover the cost of living here in the Bay Area. And she's been driving for Uber and Lyft, yes, at the age of 86. And she is a resourceful and plucky individual, and I'm happy to pass along a $100 grant to Libby to help her maybe buy dog food for Bodie. I'm not sure what she needs it for right now. I want to recommend a podcast over at whowhatwhy.org. My colleague Jeff Schechtman has a great interview with Tim Bakken. He is the first civilian promoted to professor of law at West Point, and he is a whistleblower who has survived the efforts of retaliation, is still teaching at West Point, and it's a powerful story. I hope if you have time, click on over to Who, What, Why, or follow the link in the show file at peterbcollins.com and check it out. Now here's today's coronavirus update, edited by Linda Lewis with my gratitude. She tells us that last night, after all of the wrangling at the White House, the guidance document from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has finally been released. And there's one chapter missing. It covers all kinds of possibilities here: schools, restaurants, transit systems, businesses, bars. And it gives little checklists on, when you can safely reopen and what measures you should take. But absent from the 6 decision trees released yesterday was any mention of houses of worship. Yes, our deeply religious president values the freedom of pastors of every stripe, particularly Christians, to gather the congregation, despite what risks they might face for passing the virus. And this is a clear effort at pandering. They didn't want to put up any rules that could be an impediment for people voting for the least moral administration that we've seen in a long time, and the president who is personally so devoid of any moral standards. But because he poses as being against abortion and even contraception, the Catholics and many evangelical Christians just fall in line for their dear leader. And Linda made a comment here that she worked for a time for a public education office at a federal public health agency. And she said, the experience taught me that Americans who lead very busy lives often need help in applying sanitary principles to everyday activities. She says back in 93, there was an emergency in the District of Columbia involving contamination of the public water supply with a microscopic parasite. Some early public guidance directing residents to boil tap water had to be revised to include more information, for example, pointing out that coffee makers and infant bathing using tap water were potential sources of contamination. So these are valuable documents even for, people who've been to college. But Trump delayed. They were ready in mid-April. And Trump and Crown Prince Jared and the team at the White House held it up until now, until well after many states decided to, quote-unquote, reopen at some risk to their populace. And we are seeing in particular the numbers of identified cases and hospitalizations increase in places like Texas that opened up. I haven't checked his data, but I heard Rush Limbaugh claiming that despite Georgia's being the first state to open up beauty parlors and massage parlors, that there has been an increase in testing. That is clear. So more cases are likely to be identified, but Georgia is showing a decline. And I would have to ask if that is accurate and honest information. If you'd like to see these guidelines for yourselves, I've got a link in the show file at peterbcollins.com. Linda also reports that The Lancet, which I believe is based in Britain, laments the conservative politics that have increasingly eroded the CDC's ability to mount effective, evidence-based public health responses, and they call for regime change in 2021. And I'm not sure if that's just in the White House or also at the CDC. This guy Redfield is clearly intimidated by Trump, but it has made him, I think, largely ineffective. And his testimony the other day, where he dodged questions about the release of this very guidance document, showed him to be in a totally compromised position. Linda also reports that the Fed has begun buying corporate bonds. BlackRock is in charge, and it's the world's biggest asset manager, $7.4 trillion in customer assets, they claim. So in the 6 weeks since their advisory unit won a contract with the Federal Reserve to manage billions of dollars of securities, and that program began in earnest this week, the Fed purchasing its first round of bonds, including junk bonds, identified by the firm. She said, according to the documents published by the New York Fed, BlackRock employees managing the Fed's $750 billion corporate credit facility are permitted to trade on the information they've learned after they wait 2 weeks. Now, that is so reassuring. You know, their conflict is resolved by counting to 14. Or maybe it's just 10 working days. I don't know. Anyway, during that 2 weeks, they can provide general market views to their clients. And that standard means that the firm and the individual traders are primed to benefit massively and legally from insider knowledge of what has been by far the most robust and efficient component of the bailout so far. And we have seen it to some extent propping up the stock market, but that can't go on forever. One more quote here. BlackRock and its individual traders are primed to benefit massively and legally from insider knowledge of what... Oh, I guess I just said that. Trump, when he visited Pennsylvania, went to a medical, what do you call it, the medical gear factory where they're making face masks and other protective gear. He, of course, didn't wear a mask, and he celebrated the frontline medical care workers who are running into death, just like soldiers running into bullets. Isn't that a beautiful expression? The Daily Beast reports a cadre of influential conservatives is growing increasingly convinced that the nation's foremost infectious disease expert, Dr. Anthony Fauci, is recklessly driving the nation to financial ruin. And they've begun attacking him with their favorite Hillary Clinton phrase, lock him up. Steve Bannon, Judicial Watch's Tom Fitton, Foxy Friends co-host Brian Kilmeade, and Lou Dobbs, they are all on board with the effort to demonize Dr. Fauci. Now, I don't consider him heroic, but he has navigated the treacherous waters in the swamp there at the White House, and he was still standing at the White House yesterday with a face mask on. And I want to note that Fox it's just so defective. So last night I was fixing dinner and I said, I wonder what's on Fox. So I flipped over and there's Laura Ingraham. And I remember when she was an ordinary talk radio host, she wasn't a blonde, but she is now over on the Fox News channel. And it only took 2 minutes for her to flat out lie. She was interviewing an attorney from San Francisco who is a former chair of the state Republican Party named Harmeet Dillon. And Ingram flatly said that Elon Musk was allowed to reopen the Tesla factory in Fremont because he had blackmailed or threatened that he would pull the factory out of California if he wasn't permitted to reopen. And that simply isn't true. Yes, on Saturday last week, Musk did a tweet storm where he threatened to, and he started to sell all of his personal properties. He apparently owns many, many houses here in California. He's selling them all. He threatened to move his headquarters, 1,200 people, out of California. No moves to that effect so far. But he didn't threaten and then get relief from the authorities. They flatly told him not to reopen the Tesla plant, and he did it anyway. But Laura Ingraham just rewrites the facts to suit the conclusions over there at Fox. And you may recall, in one unguarded moment of many, Trump said, I tell Mike Pence, don't call back Jay Inslee in Washington State. It's a blue state. Let him dangle. And that woman in Michigan, he couldn't summon Governor Whitmer's name. Well, she told CNN the other day that she had directly asked Mike Pence to publicly discourage the protesters who were coming to the state capitol heavily armed. She said, I've asked a couple of times, and both times it was acknowledged I made the request. But Pence never followed through. Here's an interesting set of poll numbers that have come out. I get occasional dispatches from Ipsos, which is a polling operation. For example, the peak moment of Americans self-isolating showed 55% of the nation participating in the first week of April. And that is now down to 36%. Likewise, contact with friends and family members dropped to a low of 19% the first week of April and has now climbed back to 32%. But still, people are scared about the coronavirus. 64% continue to see the external COVID-19 world as very risky. And the scariest part of these numbers is that it's so partisan. I mean, people have said this to the point that it's a cliche, but the virus doesn't choose Democrats over Republicans. But Republicans, by almost half, say that they consider the coronavirus to be a risk right now. It's 83% for Democrats, 44% for Republicans. How much risk to the health and well-being of you and your family are you willing to accept to return to normal? Well, Republicans are at 37%, Democrats at 27%. Would you go to a sporting event? If baseball opened up tomorrow, 24% said yes, with some qualifiers. They want some social distancing and free beer and hot dogs. And this is very interesting because the governors who have resisted early reopening, notably Mike DeWine in Ohio, Cuomo in New York, Newsom in California. You can keep three of those in mind for one minute, right? Well, DeWine has the highest approval rating of all these governors, 86%. Cuomo's number 2 at 81%. California's Newsom, 79%. And the former blackface impersonator, Ralph Northam, has a 78% approval rating in Virginia. Who's at the bottom of the heap? Brian Kemp in Georgia. There's a critical editorial about Gavin Newsom circulating in a group of newspapers here in the Bay Area. And I believe it's correct, and I think it also applies to Cuomo in New York. One of the weaknesses of their response has been ignoring and sometimes covering up the high rate of breakout and fatalities at nursing homes and assisted living facilities. And the editorial criticizes Newsom for offering to pay up to $1,000 a day to assisted living facilities to house COVID-19 patients. Now, assisted living is supposed to be, like apartments and some people in separate buildings. But the state has been, in some cases, forcing nursing homes to take patients, even though it could add to the spread. Now, I do believe that it's staff people who bring it in the first place, but it's the vulnerabilities of the elderly that cause it to spread and lead to the high death counts that we've seen. Newsom has also had to face the budget deficit that is looming. His revised budget calls for a 10% pay cut for California's 240,000 employees. He's canceling program expansions to the tune of $6 billion. And the biggest hit is to education because there is a fixed formula that K through 12 gets, I think it's 46% or 48% of the total state general fund. So he is shifting pension payments to cover teachers and relieve school districts of that responsibility, at least for the foreseeable future. He is rolling back corporate tax credits, and he is tapping into the so-called rainy day fund. A new study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences gives us more details on why they came up with this 6-foot distancing rule. They agree that the coronavirus, the scientists in this report, jumps from person to person, most often by hitching a ride inside tiny respiratory droplets. Now, there's some people, who spit when they talk, and you can see that. But even those of us who don't slobber that way are launching droplets just through ordinary speech. And when you sneeze or cough, you can generate 40,000 of these droplets. Now, the average just from breathing can be as high as 2,600 droplets. And the scientists found that while they start shrinking from dehydration as soon as they leave my mouth, they can still float in the air for 8 to 14 minutes. Betsy DeVos, from the billionaire family that brought you Amway, playing education secretary in this administration, she's using the fog of the virus to shift billions of dollars to private schools, charter schools, and religious schools. She's diverting it from public schools. Long term, we will see the undermining of fundamental public education and higher education in this country. And finally, Ralph Nader's Public Citizen has issued a memo with 6 big questions for Trump's so-called warp speed vaccine program. Yesterday, we told you about the guy from GlaxoSmith, it's the huge pharma conglomerate. And he's the guy who's going to run this operation. The 6 questions, they're good ones. Taxpayers have already invested billions in the search for effective vaccines and will invest billions more. Will vaccines developed with contributions from warp speed and federal government efforts be reasonably priced or free to the public? They should define that. Number 2, will the federal government publish its coronavirus vaccine-related contracts so the public can assess how our interests in access, safety, and fair pricing will be protected? Will the government require corporations and research entities to publish their vaccine-related research data so that independent experts can analyze the safety and efficacy profiles of candidate vaccines? No single corporation has vaccine manufacturing capacity to supply the world. Will the U.S. government require that corporations transfer technology and disclose know-how so that manufacturing can be brought to scale more quickly? What is the Trump administration's plan to prevent hoarding and to allocate vaccines according to health need? And finally, what is the Trump administration's plan to meet global need and in turn ensure that people in the U.S. have access to any successful vaccines developed in other countries? I bet they haven't thought about that, and I thank Public Citizen for raising the important questions. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. It's free. You're free to share it everywhere. You'll find it on YouTube, and I'm Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling.